Hello, I'm Trinity.
0, 1. Let's get started.
To have the respect and affection of other people is one of the most important things in life. Yet we don't think about it much, except when we're outside of the group, wanting to belong. Whoa, man, what You know I'm not that sacrifice. I was sitting wishing out.
Hold on. Because first of all, I'm late. LOL. I'm like 8, 9, almost 10 minutes late.
Alright. Sorry, let me just wipe down what we had yesterday for yesterday's episode off of my board and write down what Spirit has for us today. Spirit is basically doing the same thing we did yesterday. They gave me a word and they'll help probe me for today's shadow lesson or shadow reach. So yeah, good morning, good evening, good night, and all that. We are lifted, we are gifted y protegidos siempre. Si se puede, si se puede. May God bless you, may God bless me, may God bless we. Amen, 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 ashe. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Bismillah. All that. Okay. Whiteboard is clear. Well, sheesh. I need the word that Spirit had on my mind is change. Today is what? The 12th. Episode 12. Interesting. Okay, so the word for today is change. And how change affects our shadow. I feel like we know that our shadow does not like change. Or from a lot of people's shadow do not like change. Some people's shadow actually prefers change so much that like consistency makes them ill. So it just depends on where you're at as far as how evolved your shadow is or what your shadow needs to work on. But today the lesson is change and how that affects our shadow positively and negatively. So I'm getting a download of maybe some people were military kids. I wasn't a military kid. This is just simply a download. I'm getting like the military children. So if you know anything about military children, they move around a lot. They move at least once a year. At least. Honestly, I swear, bro. I've never met a military child that has stayed in an area for more than 2 years at a time. Or stayed in the same school for more than 3 years, if that. So the constant change that a military brat basically would have to go through in their childhood obviously affects them psychologically as they grow up with within the realm of consistency or within the realm of stability. So they are very familiar with change. Change is all they know. You know what I'm saying? They were always uprooted somewhere. So they didn't even have the chance to take root in an area. That is a complete opposite of me. I was not a military kid. I did move here and there throughout my childhood, yes, more than once. But for the most part, I've stayed in Virginia. I've been in Virginia my whole entire life, so that I'm rooted here, born and raised here. I, for the most part, have gone to all my schools that I was supposed to go to. Only time I changed schools was once, and that was in high school. And that was an interesting adjustment. But I would have the exact opposite experience of a military kid with change and how that would affect my shadow. So change would affect my shadow in a sense where I do not like change, or my shadow does not prefer change. I probably like change in some way, shape, or form, maybe, but my shadow does not. And the reason why my shadow would not prefer change all the time is because, one, my shadow, we're talking about me right now because I feel like that people will relate. My shadow has this thing with nostalgia. Like, my shadow has a very unhealthy attachment to nostalgia, to the point where it's like, when I was very, very depressed, like very, 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 very depressed, like the most recent one, and I was like locking myself in my room, I would get addicted to watching these like reels or these videos with like the nostalgic background noises and like the nostalgic like things, like, you know how they'll make like compilations of like a picture of a swing set, a picture of a specific neighborhood, and like the title will be like, oh, the familiar, like being familiar, or a post that has something to do with being 2000s babies, stuff like that. So posts like that, like I would, oh my god, I was so addicted to it, because when I was in that period of time of being very, very depressed, I did not want to move. I did not want to change. I wanted to die, first of all. But if that wasn't going to happen at that moment, I really wanted to be in the past, and not just like a recent past. No. I wanted to revert back to a child for a very, very long time, to the point where like my adult self was, obviously I'm in an adult body. Physically, I was in an adult body. But I was a child in a sense still. Like my shadow reverted. What is it? There's a word for that, actually. I discussed this in a video in probably one of the episodes. Well, the mechanism, or the way people go back to or revert back to a time in their childhood out of safety psychologically. But yeah, like there were so many times where I just kept going back, and because I'm so addicted to nostalgia. But we have to remember that nostalgia is tricky, because she's still full of illusions, simply because the way we remember things sometimes is not exactly how things actually went. We can obviously create romanticized versions of the past. We can create versions of the past where it is best suited for our brains to go back to, because we're not happy with our current situation. But back on the subject of change, my shadow would not prefer change, because change is scary. Change is new. Change means that you have to let go of past paradigms that suited your own illusions that you held on to. Change means death. Change means reborn in a certain, reborn. Change means transformation. You know what I'm saying? Like, I've never been afraid to transform. I've never been afraid of death. But change, for some reason, like that word change has triggered my shadow for years on end, because the moment I learned that I needed to be more present in my life was the moment where I was like, oh, there were so many times in the past where I was not present. And that is why I get so addicted to nostalgia, simply because I was not present enough in those times. Like, I was probably present, but for me personally, I wasn't present enough. So I'm looking back in hindsight, regretting not being as present as possible, whatever that means. So that is why that is an example of why a shadow could fear change. Now, going back to the army brat example, they could love change simply because, or they are so used to change simply because that's what they grew up on. They did not take root in a certain place. You know what I'm saying? Home was not a place. Home was not a physical place. So they actually do very well in change. Now, a negative side of that is they actually have trouble with being stable or with stability. Like, they need, a military child would need stability, but they crave change all the time because that's all they know. So this could play out in so many ways. It can play out in your relationships. It can play out in a whole bunch of stuff. But since I said relationships first, we'll discuss that. So a military child, because they moved around a lot in their childhood and everything, and they weren't rooted in one place, right? They're not used to staying in one area in the mind, okay? For example, or staying in a frame for a long time and planting their roots in a specific energy or a specific place. So it allows them to constantly shift and change. But in reality, is that really change, or is that just shifting from one place to another, avoiding the true like acknowledgement of your present self? The shadow of a military brat actually fears stability, because that means they would have to slow down. That means they would have to be present with their thoughts. That would mean they would have to see the same things for a while, and that would mean that they had to slow down and really analyze who they are in the present moment instead of always switching it up, so to speak. All right, Spirit is shifting me over. Topic is still change, but we're kind of transitioning to death, because change and death they're the same thing in a sense. Obviously, the number 5 is significant. If you guys know what the number 5 represents spiritually, it represents like change and transformation and stuff like that. I'm gonna write down death. D. How the hell you peel that gum with ease? I struggle with peeling oranges. Well, this isn't an orange. This is a tangerine. Tangerines are a little bit easier to peel than oranges, in my opinion. But I don't know. All right, writing down death. My brain wants to break down the word death like we did sex yesterday. I put sensual energy exchange. I kind of want to do that with death. I don't want to force it though, but my brain wants to do it. I'll just let my hand freely write. Drive. Energy. Away. Oh shit. Away. To. Heaven or hell. Holy shit, that's funny. Heaven or / hell. Or I put hell first. Okay. It's gonna be backwards, but I wrote drive, energy, away, to hell or heaven. Because when you die, you have to go somewhere, correct? Whoa, I don't know what just happened, but I'm gonna breathe. Let me breathe real quick. I'm gonna draw a spiral. A spiral might be significant. It's very significant at this time. I'm gonna let them spin like a spiral. Okay. Before we get into that, I don't know how the hell that happened. I'm going to go ahead and look up the spiritual significance of a spiral. Even though I already kind of know, I would just like to have something in front of me that I can read, so it's just consistent through and through. Spiritual significance of a... Honestly, this shadow week has gone by, it feels like it's gone by way slower than the rest, or the last one. Like, I was like, dang, yesterday I was like, damn, it's only Wednesday? Like, that's crazy. That's crazy. I wrote the spiral, and it says, sorry, I have a piece of orange in my mouth. It says, this is a website called embracingshamanism.org. The spiritual power of a spiral. Let me see. Shamans often view the spiral as a symbol of transformation and change. Just as life itself, a constant continuous cycle of birth, growth, death, and rebirth, the spiral represents the eternal process. When we observe the natural world, we see spirals in various forms, from the unfurling of a fern frond to the way a tornado winds its way across the land. These spirals serve as reminders of the cyclical nature of existence. Shamans believe that by attuning themselves to the energy of the spiral, they can facilitate personal transformation and healing. That also coincides with the number 5. I think spiral and number 5 are like they like cousins for real. Anyway, through shamanic rituals and practices, individuals can tap into their wisdom of the spiral to navigate life's changes, release old patterns, and embrace new beginnings. And that is very significant to what we're talking about, because the download of the day, or the word of the day from my downloads I got, was change, and how our shadow, and how that affects our shadow, whether our shadow fears it, embraces it, or uses it as a coping mechanism. It's almost like a girl who keeps dyeing their hair thinking that's going to change something. She hasn't faced what she needs to face. She just keeps dyeing her hair. She just keeps cutting her hair thinking like, oh. She keeps shaving her head. She keeps dyeing her hair. She keeps buying. She keeps changing her wardrobe. She keeps doing this. She thinks that's going to change. Oh, it's you're changing on a whole. No. Sit with the change. You can you can try to force a change. Either way, the cycle of change or the intention of change is going to happen regardless, whether you help it or not. 9 times out of 10, when people want to force a change, it's really because they want to skip a step. Like, for example, they don't want to face the quote-unquote emotional turmoil they'll get from changing their viewpoint or something. So for example, say you had a certain way of thinking your entire life. You only thought one way about certain things, or a certain philosophy, whatever. And then one day you witness something that shatters your entire reality. Like, it makes you feel like your life was a lie. That would have to trigger a psychological change. If not just a psychological change, that would have to trigger a change in your whole entire 5D being, because your brain just witnessed something that is different, and you're downloading more codes that are completely different than what you know or what you've clung on to. Now you might go in a literal downward spiral simply because that's not what you quote unquote know. And then that points us back to what I just wrote down right now. That would drive your energy away to either hell or heaven. Hi, love. Change will either drive your energy away to hell or to heaven, depending on how you take it. And not even just how you take it. Sometimes we all have different assignments. Sometimes we have to go to hell, learn some lessons. We have to go to heaven and learn some lessons. It's just, I don't view heaven or hell as you know what I'm saying? There's heaven and hell on earth. You can pick and choose where you go, but sometimes God does give you assignments so you can learn. So yeah. Let me see if there's any more downloads for today. It's pretty short. It's 8:58, which is, we're good, doing good timing. I guess we could do a quick little synopsis, a thing about heaven and hell, and then we'll get out of here. This is kind of short. Heaven versus hell. When talking about heaven and hell, we're talking about the scapes. So the hellscapes, heaven, and as a state of mind. And that's how they were like, oh, it's heaven on earth, or it's hell on earth. They're all on earth. I feel like heaven and hell there's so many dimensions, like how they speak about Dante's Inferno, how there's several freaking layers to hell and everything like that. Like, I feel like heaven and hell, yes, is a state of mind, but it still is above Earth, below Earth, in Earth, around Earth. Like, I feel like almost every planet has their version of heaven and hell. I feel like every state of being has their version of heaven and hell. Every dimension, 5D, 3D, 1D, 2D, all the dimensions and all the universes, omniverses have their own version of heaven and hell. So heaven and hell is not just what the spiritual girls were saying, like, oh, it's in your, that's just a construct. Yes, it's a construct, but there's so many versions of heaven and hell, and so many with the multiverse, bruh. It's the multiverses. Hold on. Let me calm down. Holy shit, let me calm down. It's never that deep, but it is that deep. Why the fuck? Okay. Anyway, so when talking about heaven and hell as a state of mind, we're just gonna stay right there. Spirit wants me to talk about the time where I was in just say spiritual jail. I've definitely been in spiritual jail before. It's not fun. It's what they call a mental entrapment or mental imprisonment. And that is honestly no different from hell. It's just a version of hell that is daunting and self-imposed almost. While I was in there, I don't want to make this so long, but while I was in there, I swear to you guys, you ever like watch those videos where it's on like the body's on like airplane mode and the person's watching itself do things, but they're in their body, but they're just witnessing their body do shit. That's literally how it was. And I don't want to talk about that too much. All I'm going to say is the construct of heaven and hell is different for everybody. Everybody will experience heaven and hell differently based off of how you grew up, what you consider good or bad, your emotional bandwidth, your recognition of God or lack thereof in your life. Heaven and hell will look different for every single being on this planet. There are also, and I'm not talking about the heaven up there and the hell up there. We'll discuss that in a whole different video. But I'm talking about the constructs of heaven and hell as a mental entrapment or a mental place. Heaven and hell. Heaven, you can have heaven in the mind. You can have heaven on the earth. You can go to a beach. That's heaven right there. You can sit down and meditate and thinking about the wonderful food you want to eat. Like you're in Peter Pan, and that's heaven in the mind. It's all about perspective. But sometimes we go to these places because we are fearing what? Change. We trap ourselves in our mind because we physically do not want to change, or we do not want to go with the times that our body is telling us to, or our mind is telling us to, or even that God is leading us to a specific change in our lives. So we trap ourselves in our own heaven or hell to avoid accountability. All right, that's it, y'all. I love you guys, and happy Shadow Week. We have, Friday and Saturday, so we have 2 more days left, and then I'm finally done with Shadow Week. Oh my gosh, it's like, I feel like this shit is dragging out. Goddamn. All right, I love y'all. Bye. God bless y'all.